people are the most excited about the fact that AI should finally potentially solve financial literacy. A lot of people maybe thought that education is the problem, or that access to information is the problem, or that this is maybe a UI problem in terms of how can we get people to do what's best for their finances or the best financial health for managing their business. The problem with the idea of financial literacy is that if you're an entrepreneur building a business, you don't always have the time if you're a CTO or a CEO to also be a CFO.
Hello, I'm Adam Haney. This is the Open Story Podcast where I talk to technology leaders, builders, and visionaries about their projects and passions. Today, I have William Littlefield, who is the COO and CTO of Unlimited. Thanks for taking time.
Hey, Adam. Pleasure to be joining. Thanks so much for talking to us and talking to Unlimited, where we're really excited to be building the next generation of AI tools for financial services.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk about AI agents and how that's going to impact the finance industry as a whole. But first, I'd love to get to know you a little bit better. I think you have a really cool backstory, life story overall. Before we get into how you started working in AI and finance, I want to learn a little bit about your Olympic journey.
Yeah, boy, that's taken me back. So I do have a relatively unconventional path to entrepreneurship. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, where I, like most other kids, played a lot of sports. Growing up, that was Little League, soccer, and hockey. When I was growing up, the Dallas Stars won the Stanley Cup. And so a lot of kids my age wanted to learn how to play hockey. My parents took me to the rink, and a coach approached them when I was 8 years old and said, "Hey, your son looks like he could get better at skating, and I'll teach him for free. But I want to teach him half ice skating, half hockey." And then 5 years later, I was competing at U.S. Nationals in ice skating for the first time. And somehow I ended up doing that for about 15 years. So I spent the better part of my teenage life on the development team for the Olympics in ice skating, competed at U.S. Nationals, and did that all the way up until university. And right around then, it was time for some of the Olympic Games to become qualifying around again. And I had an ankle surgery. I had a lot of friends that competed in that game. So it was the Sochi Olympics at the time. And that was when I decided that I was sitting at home in crutches, and I figured I didn't want to sit at home and self-pity. And so I began building my first technology company, and that's how I got kicked off into my entrepreneurial journey.
Well, it's great that you made the best of a kind of difficult situation. I can tell that you really throw your whole self into things and do them at a really high level. So that's a very unique way of kind of getting into technology. And then from there, you studied philosophy as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I've always had a bit of a parallel career as an academic and as an entrepreneur. I would say, I studied for a bachelor's and master's in philosophy and chemistry and world literature. And then I began working toward a PhD in philosophy over in Amsterdam until that was slightly interrupted by the pandemic, while I was also raising for the next round of my current tech company or current tech venture, which was a equities trading platform. But I've always maintained a parallel career as an academic researcher ever since. So I still am happy to participate in philosophy conferences. I've spoken at the American Philosophical Association, and think that we're seeing some really difficult and interesting questions in philosophy today. Philosophy is maybe more relevant in technology than it has been in a long time. I think that there was always some overlap with philosophy in questions around the ethics of privacy, but AI has really kicked it into high gear where everyone recognizes there's important ethical questions, questions around consciousness, philosophy of psychology, and the philosophy of creativity in media and art.
Very cool. Well, I know, obviously AI is having impacts across all sorts of different industries. What are you seeing, as it relates to, AI or maybe even specifically as it relates to AI agents in the finance space?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So at Unlimited, we're building AI for financial services companies. More specifically, we build vertical AI applications through a core platform we call Unlimited Mint. And we bundle those for our customers. And we typically focus on three main verticals right now, which is asset management, insurance, and banking. But we also have done work in the space of compliance and credit disputes, and a couple other verticals such as payroll and payments. So there's a whole bunch of opportunity. And it's true that agents have become a big part of the conversation very recently. So when we first began rolling out AI into enterprises a year ago at Unlimited, we were building RAG implementations. We were building fine-tuned LLMs and chain of thought prompting work. And today, the conversation, to your point, Adam, has really pivoted to agents and agentic workflows. And so we're starting to see real penetration across financial services writ large that is taking on an agentic component.
Do you think across sort of like compliance, insurance, asset management, that there's any one of those that you're seeing the most traction, or where there's a largest opportunity for lift, either in terms of how it impacts their business, or that the AI techniques are most well applied to that particular kind of segment?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question there is basically, where can AI be helpful in these verticals, and is there a specific vertical where it's been more helpful than others? Well, across financial services, the pain points and problems that we see reoccurring over and over again really come across from there being long manual review processes. So in financial services, it's obviously important to compare things like policy documents or compliance and regulatory considerations across customer transactions. So you have transactions, policies, and regulatory considerations all at once. And usually an intelligent knowledge worker in financial services has to know all three of those things. Well, it's much easier for an agent to pull the data in the fragmented data sets we see in financial services. And that's true across all three of those verticals. And it's also very easy for an agent to page through arcane policies and procedures, which are not so much fun for humans to read through. So we really see adoption across those verticals, not necessarily specifically to a particular vertical, but more specifically across problem sets that involve manual review, scattered data sets, and we're beginning to crack the nut on tangled legacy software and upgrading tangled legacy software in enterprises for the AI era. And that was a tough nut to crack in finance.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the finance industry, famously has a ton of infrastructure that's still running on mainframes, that still is, using COBOL, and is, 30, 40, 50 years old overall. I'm curious, where do you see the most challenges whenever it comes to integrating those kind of systems? Are there places that you feel like AI is not ready yet, or where it's just now starting to break through that you're excited about?
Yeah, that's well put. So I would say where we are with AI at this moment of us having this conversation, Adam, is we're beginning to use AI in these financial services companies to eliminate a lot of low margin, rote, redundant review processes and rote labor in financial services companies, really stuff that falls into back office operations. Now, the thing about those kinds of business processes is that right now, I think everyone is learning to figure out how to do QA of AI. They're figuring out how do we make sure that we are meeting our compliance requirements while implementing AI? How can we be sure we're meeting the right benchmarks and accuracy we need for some of these more mission critical applications? I would say we're still pretty early in the adoption of AI. I think there's still enormous opportunity for AI to penetrate into financial services beyond just back office processes, which is where we are right now. And my point is that how deep is AI into some of these high stakes financial services tech stacks? And the answer is relatively superficial at the moment. I think that's going to change as 2025 continues to roll on. By the end of the year, we might start seeing AI in more critical applications, but we need to see more market adoption of good user interfaces and good benchmarks for QAing the performance of AI in those kinds of environments.
So is it all manual QA right now, or like are there other sort of risk mitigation mechanisms? Like how do you think about whenever you're maybe trying to help solidify or help to add AI to a process in order to make it move more quickly or more efficiently? Is it entirely human in the loop? Is the sort of current way that you think about it? How do you think about the level of risk of one of these processes? I guess in general, I'm just curious. Whenever you're trying to identify this is a process that's a good candidate for AI versus this is one that isn't. How do you think about risk? And then in addition to human QA, are there other mechanisms to think about de-risking those processes?
Yeah, so there are really two areas where we tend to think about risk when we work with our customers or design partners. And the first of which is Unlimited has to deploy AI in a way that our customers are going to be comfortable, in particular, in how we handle their data. So that comes down to making sure that the solutions we create, or the solutions for AI agents and agentic workflows and RAG, are things that come out of the box with permissions, authentication, and which we deployed locally on virtual private networks, sometimes even running in an air-gapped system where you're doing this stuff with Olama on a local machine. And so trying to button it down that way. Obviously, there's other use cases where we can deploy it to the cloud and use a web app, and those are typically less sensitive applications. But sometimes you need to do that also to access some more of the state-of-the-art models. So the first question that we have to deal with is, when we're working in financial services, where is this data going to live, and can we deploy it in an environment that's going to meet the requirements of the needs of the marketplace? And the second risk consideration, which I think you were perhaps pressing on more, is, well, how confident can we be delegating these processes to AI? And how do we mitigate risk, or think about humans in the loop, or think about how we are willing to incorporate AI and manage the risk of doing so? So everyone recognizes that AI has the capacity, of course, to hallucinate. It's a term we were introduced to early on in ChatGPT rolling out to the market. People that work on AI and probably just about everyone now recognizes that there's an element of AI in terms of next token prediction, which has a kind of probabilistic flavor. And so in a way, it's kind of going from a deterministic world to a probabilistic world when you switch to using LLMs in decision making. It's certainly more probabilistic than having deductive logic or rules-based systems. Of course, rules-based systems were a lot more limited in their capacity for decision making, which is why we have to switch to AI that's LLM-based now. But how do you go and put guardrails on a system like that? Well, the main technique that we have seen has basically been in creating tiers and escalation layers throughout the applications we're building, and then assigning confidence intervals or assigning rules around which kinds of processes or transactions need to be reviewed by a human. So something that's relatively low stakes that might altogether be automated today or automated to pass through in terms of a financial services process. You can think of basically small dollar transactions in payments, or you can think of small dollar chargebacks in disputes. If those meet certain criteria, sometimes they're just passed through systems without being reviewed carefully by a person. So there's already plenty of situations where we're not necessarily reviewing everything step by step. But what you want to do is you basically want to trigger layers of escalation in your AI applications, where if you're not meeting a particular confidence threshold for a result, or if there's higher stakes criteria, such as very sensitive or private data or higher transaction amounts, then we're going to trigger a human in a loop.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think that you guys are thinking, deeply about all of the different elements that go into risk. Is there yet an equivalent of like a SOC 2 or another sort of compliance standard, either generally or in the finance industry overall, that serves to sort of, standardize how you think about determining that level of risk, or is that still something that, we as a community need to develop?
SOC 2 is definitely still important, and it can be applied to AI applications, but particularly in their infrastructure and their deployment. However, I would say yes, that's something the industry is still coalescing around. What are going to be the right use cases where we think using AI and AI agents in particular or even multi-agents is going to be acceptable. So no, those I would say those industry standards are really being developed in real time.
Well, I want to pivot a little bit. So we've been talking about, there's the risk level and what things are good candidates and how do we think about mitigating that risk. I think another dimension I'm really curious about is the sort of spectrum from tactical to strategic in terms of how these agents can be applied. And so you talked a lot about replacing back office kinds of tasks, doing things that are very repetitive that require information retrieval, but maybe not necessarily planning and reasoning. How do you think about sort of, how far along the models are in that dimension of reasoning, planning sort of tasks? I think when you get like all the way to the top of, actually managing investment decisions or managing some real value creation processes within these financial institutions, is that on the horizon? Something that you think that we're really far away from? And where do you sort of see the gaps right now?
Yeah, wow, what a fun question that is. That's exactly right. So I think a lot of people are trying to wrap their arms around how agents work. What is the difference between single agent versus multi-agent? What's the benefit of using an agent over chain of thought prompting? And one of the ways I like to try and abstract it or think about it is you can almost think of the way agents behave in their complexity as not so different from the way that more and more senior knowledge workers have to behave. So really what we want to do with technology, sort of from a philosophical perspective, is we kind of want to eliminate drudgery from the human condition. That's sort of the goal of productivity gains and technology and technological progress. So we want to eliminate tasks that we consider to be, there's a wonderful phrase from the philosopher Selma Bringsword that encapsulates this well, which is computation, among other things, is beneath us. And beneath computation, I think, is there are some tasks that are inclusive in back office processes, which are the kind of tasks you might consider rote or formulaic, in which even systems pre-AI were able to sometimes get their arms around in terms of machine learning, or even simpler tasks that could just be automated away using Zapier or something. Unquestionably, there's still large quantities of people around the world that are employed doing things like data entry, which you and I, Adam, might consider some of that basically a solved problem with automation. So, right, yeah. So in terms of the way AI behaves, I think it follows a similar path in terms of trying to step up the level of complexity that a knowledge worker might be dealing with. At the lowest level of doing the kind of work we really want to eliminate from the human condition, that kind of work we might call rote or drudgery, that's sort of the simplest form of AI automation, where an AI is working through a task. You might liken that to something like N8N, which is sort of an AI-powered version of Zapier or Make, and there's several other great products in the market for that. In terms of how agents work, right, what we've seen evolve in the market is we saw agents, even simple forms of OpenAI's models like GPT, we're doing one-off prompts and responses. And people were using tools to string together chain of thought prompting. And that allowed us to do a kind of step up in terms of reasoning. Well, now a single threaded AI model can reason before it provides a single response. What we're seeing with all the multi-agent architectures is, I think you said it perfectly when you called it tactical versus strategic. Which is now we're at a stage where AI agents might be able to be assigned to handle a couple tasks at once. Well, let's say the simplest, or one of the more common, or definitely not the simplest, but one of the more common guardrails or examples, touch points that people tend to use is how AI might work in a financial market. And that might be, well, if I'm making an AI agent to make sort of, like you said, investment decisions, if I have a multi-agent orchestration, in the past, an AI making investment decisions as a single agent might just look at where current market data stands, or have some content fed into it, some context about today's current market scenarios in a finance textbook, and make a decision about what you should invest in. A multi-agent system, as you know, Adam, will probably incorporate something like a stock ticker feed, which is being analyzed by one agent, a second agent, which is maybe reading consumer sentiment on X or Twitter, and then a third agent, which is doing historical analysis of current market conditions versus sentiment and patterning it back against historical financial data, and then collecting that data to come into like a real-time investment decision. So that would all still, in my opinion, be relatively tactical. It's an advanced form of tactics,
Yeah.
but it's non-strategic. There's not as many sophisticated systems yet that we're seeing where I think the next frontier is going to be how does an AI act as a sophisticated hedge fund manager, not just a few analysts that work at the hedge fund, but someone that can consume information, synthesize it, and make decisions over very long time horizons and stick to a particular strategy across that time.
This is a hard question to answer, but I'm curious, like, do you think that we're going to get to that place as an emergent behavior of having so many different agents that have well-defined tasks and then sort of the messaging bus in between them? Or do you think that, that's going to be a new step forward in terms of the capabilities of, our current models or maybe even new architectures of models in order to be able to do that kind of planning and reasoning work?
Yeah, that's so. So if you're working on the frontier of AI today, something you will learn is that a lot of the most state-of-the-art models, especially once you start getting into multimodal models, they have to process a lot of information in real time to achieve the kinds of things that we already have the ambitions to do with them. If you want to work with a model that's going to be processing real-time stock market data and also maybe not just processing text, but maybe processing charts and graphs, or even processing images or different kinds of maybe meteorological data can be useful in, for example, the pricing of commodities. And sometimes that comes in the form of heat maps or things like that. So if you have several models working together, something you will know today if you've built these multi-agent systems is that even the toughest, most resourced models that have to sit on top of a few different AI models at once have to really consume an incredible amount of information and process an incredible amount of information to act at the same time. And those systems, frankly, are not entirely stable yet.
Well, I think we've got a lot left to build. Listen, I want to pivot a little bit more into what you're doing with Unlimited. So obviously, you're using this new technology, but you're coming into an industry that has a lot of established players. How do you think about, the way that Unlimited either partners with or competes with some of the traditional financial firms? How has it been building AI for that industry?
With Unlimited, we're really excited about the way we've been able to go to market with excellent design partners and how we're developing AI for the enterprise. So the two alternative paradigms that you see out there to Unlimited, one of them would be straightforward software as a service. So there are tons and tons of startups that are building AI in the financial services space and basically building it according to the traditional SaaS playbook. They are setting up AI to handle a certain set of discrete tasks that they are then productizing and selling to solve a niche problem and going out there and taking it to market as you would any other SaaS product. Just AI is now doing part of the back end labor, the business logic. The alternative you're seeing, of course, is you have lots of enterprises which have recognized that AI is not optional. One of the nice parts about working in AI right now is that, unlike other technologies, crypto, for example, there's no firm out there that thinks that AI is something that's going to go away or be trending or be a fad or be something that's optional to adopt. So everyone recognizes this resources have to go here. What we're seeing alternatively to SaaS, of course, is blue chip companies that have the budgets to do so are trying to go out and hire top talent in the AI space and begin building AI applications internally that are reducing headcount, that are automating away some of their lower margin tasks so they can focus on more revenue generating activities. An example of that might be, for example, McKinsey has built a product in-house, which a lot of people have been talking about, called Dexter. And Dexter is able to spit out lots of slide templates for PowerPoint. And That's an example of an in-house product developed by an AI team versus one that might be coming out of Silicon Valley that's developing a PowerPoint for building AI or building an AI-powered PowerPoint. Where Unlimited sits in the middle is we have this core platform of AI tools, which has all of the bells and whistles you would want for any kind of core platform technology in financial services. That's the capacity to deploy it locally in the cloud, single tenant, multi-tenant, depending on your compliance needs. It has all the authentication, analytics, permissions-based dashboard, and other bells and whistles in addition to integrations to just more than a dozen of the best models out there for handling all different kinds of AI tasks, and then several different orchestration layers and layers around agentic workflows such as LangChain and Llama Index. So all of that comes out of the box with Unlimited. And then what we do with our design partners is even if we go to a company that has a strong in-house AI team, or if we go to a company that doesn't have any in-house AI team, what we can do is we can take our building blocks and work directly with design partners to create agentic workflows in ways that recycle some of the work we might have already built or some of the agentic workflows we've already erected and customize them to the actual processes that they currently use in their business. So that's how we sit between those two poles of internal AI teams and a straight up SaaS platform.
I'm curious, when you think about different companies, the blue chip companies that are building their own internal teams versus the people that, go out and work with a partner. Who have you seen that you think has done that the best? Who is sort of, in the traditional finance space building the strongest AI team?
Who is building the strongest AI team in the traditional finance space? So I obviously don't want to disclose any conversations with customers. Sure. That being said, I will tell you it's been all over the board. And this is pretty striking, actually. So we've talked to companies that are multi-billion dollar companies. And on the one hand, you'll have a group that has a fully dedicated AI team where they have gone out and hired AI researchers with deep resumes in some parts of the academic literature around AI, some people which have built cool AI engineering applications, done acquisitions of early stage AI companies. And then on the other hand, we've talked to companies of exactly identical scale. And they wouldn't necessarily be the companies you would expect. You might think like, well, legacy or incumbent financial services companies might be slow to adopt AI. Maybe they seem to have been slow to adopt technology compared to, say, challenger banks or neobanks, which obviously basically leverage technology to create some kind of product offering that was able to challenge incumbents because it was more tech native. You would think that maybe the challenger banks or neobanks would have stronger AI teams just due to their history and how earlier in their or how more recent their development was in terms of their tech stack. But that hasn't been what we've seen in the market. We have gone out and talked to legacy or incumbent financial institutions which have excellent AI teams. And we've talked to more Web 2.0 companies in the financial services space that basically rebranded their data science team as their AI team. And while they're doing some machine learning, they're not really building AI native applications or making a big shift. And it's surprising sometimes you'll talk to people that have been working in machine learning for a long time, and then they maybe aren't even sure what RAG is, retrieval augmented generation, which has kind of already become a no longer trending topic. It's already had its 5 minutes of fame.
It's kind of commoditized, and overall everybody knows how to do it.
Exactly. I would say that it's been very heterogeneous, is what I'm trying to say to answer your question. Without naming names, it's very heterogeneous.
Sure, yeah. Well, let's look even further into the future. We've talked about the ways that we're mitigating risk. We've talked about the way that we think about how the tools that you guys are building are going to help, various different financial services firms, in different parts of the segment, whether it's the neobanks or the traditional people. 10 years from now, I mean, I think, worth remembering that, ChatGPT is only 3 or 4 years old at this point. So it seems like we've been kind of going through a Cambrian explosion. So it's hard for me to say, 5 or 10 years, but how do you think sort of understanding the structure of these different firms and the challenges that they have, how do you think the industry is going to change?
I think about this one a lot, and it is very exciting. It is hard. It is a Cambrian explosion that was well put. I would say the two things that have been keeping me up lately are, on the one hand, the idea that the experience of working with fintech is potentially going to become much less screen based, much less UI based than it has been over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Interesting.
And the second piece, which I'll talk more about, is how I'm expecting AI to penetrate financial markets. But sticking on the first point real quickly, one of the things that we're seeing with AI agents, of course, something that I think we all will recognize in the technology space could be emergent by the end of year and certainly be well adopted in 2026, is agent to agent communication, where agent to agent communication is maybe going to end up displacing the way that applications interact with each other currently. And the way that most applications work today, right, is if I log into my JP Morgan Chase banking app, I use my Face ID to open a UI on my phone, on my smartphone, and then I click around the app to do whatever it is I need to do. And that's a human communicating with a UI to communicate to an API. And what we're seeing increasingly with agent to agent communication, of course, is, well, let's imagine a future where AI is all around me, kind of like Internet of Things. It's going to be AI of Things potentially. And that might be it might live in my phone. It might live in an Alexa style device. My personal pet project or pet way of thinking about it is a personal companion drone, like you would see in Star Wars or something. And you will just maybe, like in Her, that great Joaquin Phoenix Spike Jonze film, you will just maybe talk to your AI agent and say, "Hey Billy, send $20 to Adam." And there's no opening a Chase banking app. There's no need to click or verify something. It's maybe verified based on my voice and based on the AI that recognizes me and has all of my authentication baked in. But my point is that in the point of interacting with financial services, your agents are going to be able to authenticate with you immediately because they're going to have access to all of your data and potentially biometrics on the spot in real time. And you're not going to be finding yourself interacting potentially with screens or with a UI to do your banking and your financial work anymore. And I think that's possibly true not just in fintech, but across, of course,
all
of
of
technology.
consumer interaction overall. Like it's just a new form factor that we're gonna engage with all of our applications with.
Yeah, I'm basically wondering if one idea that occurred to me this week is, I wonder if it's the case that if our generation is going to maybe have had more screen time than any other generation before or after for this reason. Because I think it's very possible that with agent to agent communication, screen time will go down and the need to use point and click GUIs is going to go down to do your work. And so obviously I had a lot less screen time in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I think my kids will have less screen time than I did.
I'm so curious what the sort of developmental and psychological impact of that is going to be. Because I think about, I have cousins that are younger that are glued to iPads or glued to phones. I'm curious, how is if we're still interacting with machines, but it is a form factor that's more familiar and more social in some way, how is that going to impact people's the way that they digest information, how they're educate themselves, and ultimately like how we interact with each other? Because obviously, I mean, I'm sure you've been to like a dinner or party where like everybody kind of has their phone out.
Yeah.
Does it become do we become more social, or do we become more social with inanimate things? Who knows? But that's really interesting. I never thought about the reduction in screen time overall.
Yeah, so that's one thing I think about a lot. I think it will change banking. It will hopefully make it more natural, conversational, and you'll just converse with AI about your finances, and I'm sure we'll find some private way to do it. The other thing I think about a lot is again definitely the way that AI will penetrate financial markets. So that was the second point I brought up. If you look back over the last couple of decades in financial innovation, one of the clear changes has been not just the emergence, but the eventual dominance of high frequency trading. there's great books about that, such as like Flash Boys by Michael Lewis. Definitely a good read if anyone is listening on that one.
Flash Boys
But
is
basically,
fantastic.
it is, isn't it? It's an amazing, and Michael Lewis is just a great writer. But it's fascinating to just understand he does a good job of introducing the kind of adventure that goes to innovation. Talking about obviously the fiber optic cables that are buried under mountains that no one knows about, very clandestine,
Yeah.
but fascinating. So if you know about high frequency trading, you know that basically a huge amount of market volume today is computers trading against computers. Retail investors and the sort of idea of a person on a phone that's like a stockbroker sending trades is kind of a long gone incorrect way to conceive of markets, how they behave today. A lot of it is computers seeing computers. So they kind of give us a peek into what agent to agent communication might look like in a way. If you think about the way that, kind of going back to our example, screen time, it definitely used to be the case that there were two people on the other side of the screens that were doing transactions. And you still might see that today with certain kinds of financial instruments that are not over the counter, maybe some kinds of derivatives or alternative assets in an illiquid market. But a lot of trading, a huge amount of market volume, like we just said, has dissolved into this GUI-less, interfaceless trading of computers trading with other things. So the question is, with how are agents going to behave once agents, or really how is the market going to behave once a vast majority of market participants become AI agents? And markets, of course, are just, when people first conceived of them and the way that they're classically conceived in like an economics or finance textbook, is markets are just the summation of the individual buyers and sellers within them, right? And the quality of market participants you get dictate the kind of market behavior that you have. Retail investors behave differently than value investors, behave differently than high frequency traders do. And depending on which kinds of participants make up the majority of a market, it's going to behave in a different way. And so the thing that keeps me up at night a little bit is definitely as AI agents in their more complicated multi-agent frameworks, as they develop the capacity to ingest data from 10 different models at once and have a sort of strategic layer on top, how will market behavior overall shift in global financial markets? And basically, I expect that humans will progressively get pushed out of making actual trades.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like it seems like the volume, I think, a few years back tipped over to more of the high frequency firms than human trades. I think obviously a lot of the high frequency, the logic that is performing those trades is very, rules based, very sort of, we're talking about things like statistical arbitrage and overall.
Right.
You're looking at HFT, even obviously from Flash Boys, does just a lot of what is effectively front running of trades. When you get
Yeah, that's
into,
right.
I think from earlier we were talking about the difference between tactical and strategic. In some ways, the non AI driven HFT algorithms are effectively very high speed tactical executors.
Yeah.
As opposed to, as the models become able to parse, news and not just look for keywords, but overall ingest sort of changes to the structure of the world. It's going to be really interesting to then see. These are not just well-tuned quantitative statistical algorithms, but they are themselves agents that are making strategic decisions about the trades that they want to make.
And with high frequency trading, just to touch on what you said there, with high frequency trading, the story of high frequency trading is basically, as you were mentioning with front running, it's whoever can execute the trade fastest wins.
Yeah.
That was sort of the iron rule of high frequency trading, and probably still remains so today to some extent. Is that in a crowded market, the fastest to execute the trade wins. And so you have a lot of different computers that are running on different rails, and the actual hardware infrastructure ends up being a key differentiator. Which server is closer to the actual server for the stock exchange? And that physical distance ends up being an important variable. And the server that's closest, it's sort of a winner take all system in front running, where the server that's absolutely closest is going to win outright on a lot of trades. And the question will then when you look at the AI agentic perspective, you start asking, well, will it then be the case that whichever agentic system has the latest model, has it running on the best clusters, does it similarly become a game of hardware infrastructure where you have the best in class models almost competing like an AI arena? And that financial markets end up maybe looking something like AI benchmarks do.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to know, one dimension is the speed with which you can execute the trade and the amount of capital that you have, and the other one is obviously the alpha of that trade in terms of like the knowledge or quality of the decision making that's going on. And so it's almost when I think about sort of these really large models that take a really long time to make a decision or to sort of reason through a chain of thought to decide on what they're going to do, and it seems like you're going to have a trade-off there between I can get there faster with a worse decision versus and sort of thinking along those two different tensions. Well, in this backdrop of all of these like really interesting things that are happening, what are you personally most excited to build or to see develop in this space?
Those are not exactly the same question.
Sure, we can take both.
But yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason why they're not exactly the same is because what's beautiful about being here in this moment in 2025 in AI is, so going back to the heterogeneous situation in adoption I was talking about earlier, it's a perfect example of the William Gibson quote, the famous one that the future is here, just not evenly distributed yet. So there's still so much incredible work to be done in simply getting the current AI knowledge and AI capability we have into market. Even though you and I were just saying RAG at this point is kind of no longer the trending topic in the AI community, well, it is still barely penetrating all of its potential applications. The thing about where we are in AI right now is that the landscape is moving so fast, and we're beginning to see emergent behavior, or we can begin to see things on the landscape that are so exciting in terms of their paradigm shift, that you look back at, you can see like where we will be or what we're capable of a year from now. But then you look back at where we are in the present moment, and it's like, well, we might be capable of these incredible feats in a year, but there is still 2 years of technology that we haven't done a good job distributing throughout the market yet. So there's a lot of work to be done to just get what's currently possible already into the hands of all the different institutions that can benefit from it. So really my point is that adoption is really lagging in terms of the speed of AI technology's advancement. And so that being said, it is exciting because you feel like you can go to a lot of these teams, a lot of these financial institutions, and when you think about them AI first and AI native from what's currently possible, it looks like, boy, we can rebuild like this entire organization. If you just implemented the current AI we have on April 30th, 2025, which is the day that we're recording this podcast, there's still just 90% of what we're going to implement still remains to be done. And so it is exciting to just be basically a gospel messenger, kind of like Paul Revere, that the robots are here,
Sure.
the robots are coming, it's available, let's get it here. So you feel like an evangelist, you're bringing the good news as a missionary of AI. So yeah, I'm really excited. It's always exciting to show people what AI is currently capable of. At a lot of these incumbent legacy institutions, I'm having a really good time deploying that with Unlimited, and that is part of what we're doing. And in terms of what I'm excited about coming forward, I think of all the things that are maybe the most exciting on the horizon. I think most people are the most excited about the fact that AI should finally potentially solve financial literacy. If you look at how fintech has tried to attack this problem in the past, a lot of people maybe thought that education is the problem, or that access to information is the problem, or that this is maybe a UI problem in terms of how can we get people to do what's best for their personal finances or the best financial health for managing their business. The problem was that the problem with the idea of financial literacy is that if you're an entrepreneur building a business, you don't always have the time if you're a CTO or a CEO to also be a CFO. That being said, you do obviously want to make savvy decisions in your personal finances and the finances of your business. And so there's just not always enough time to consume all of the available financial data at your disposal to make intelligent, informed decisions at the same time. There's not always time to learn or read all the books that are coming out on the current state of how you should be investing or updating your investments in 2025 or in 2024. And so the idea of having an AI assisted tool which will allow people to invest correctly or to run their business more efficiently and have that be up to date and consuming all the latest information. I think that's maybe what I'm most excited about in the immediate future. Just having basically everyone should have their own personal financial guru available 24/7.
That's an exciting future. And I agree. It's, these are complicated products, and being able to help people to understand, how they work, how they help them to achieve their goals, seems like a great, future. Well, let me ask Billy, I feel like we've covered a lot of different things. Is there anything in this space that you feel like people aren't talking about enough, or that you really, are passionate about, that you think, needs more airtime?
Yeah, I would say I would say maybe the thing that is finally coming to market, which wasn't quite there last year, and I think you maybe even had some experience working on this problem, Adam, is that one of the things that people realized AI would be good for in financial services is ingestion of data to create financial reports and provide accurate feedback in terms of quantitative analysis. So there were a couple things that were missing in the last year that have really matured in AI, and I'm excited to be able to be telling people they're finally here. And the first of those was that AI was really bad at math.
Yeah.
And this makes sense for lots of reasons. If you understand how AI models work, if you understand that the way that they learn is basically this inductive way of ingesting vast quantities of data and then predicting the next token, even some of the most sophisticated AI models are still doing something like that at their core. Well, that's not a great way to learn to do math, because you're just sort of looking for literally the exact problem that has maybe occurred in your data set, where you have the two numbers that you need to add together and what the answer is, rather than actually working out the problem. And that meant that AI was extremely limited in doing a certain kind of data analysis, right? If you were trying to run a famous example in the AI community was if you asked AI, is 1.11 greater than 1.2, it would often say yes. And the reason why is because it had two digits behind the decimal, and 11 is larger than 2. Of course, that's a fallacy, though, right? 1.2 is larger than 1.11. But if from the way that you think about like a text-based, induction-based understanding of language, you can imagine why even good LLMs would fail that test. And now today we're starting to see mixtures of expert systems where AI is recognizing that the text it's ingesting is quantitative, and it needs to maybe do a function call or activate a specialized agent which is dedicated to math and running those operations and then replying and doing things like chain of thought or chain of reasoning, chain of reasoning before replying to you. So you're seeing AI finally get to the point where it can really do pretty reliable work with numerical problems. The second thing that has finally started to reach maturity, and everyone was excited about this in the financial services community, is document parsing. Financial documents, I don't care if you are a CFO or someone who is an accountant to the bone, it just gets tiring to read spreadsheets and ledgers and financial documents and legalese after doing it for several hours per day, and having to cross-reference many different documents and do this for 40 hours a week is in my personal opinion, it's not the most fun way to work. Or at least you want to have someone. It'd be at least be nice to not have to do it, to have some choice and leveraging AI tools to help you, even if you do enjoy it. But the point is that document ingestion and parsing has also started to really become a solved problem in the AI community. And the combination of those two things is really powerful because it means now that we can upload troves of financial documents to an AI. It will reliably parse them. And although we still need to be extra careful about making sure we assign good confidence intervals, assign good escalation procedures to trigger humans in the loop. It's now possible to ingest vast amounts of financial documents and get consistent reporting on the other side. And that's extremely helpful for banks, asset managers, and insurance companies, whether it's reviewing policy documents and making a decision, whether it is compiling market data from financial reports of portfolio companies and creating an end-of-month report, or whether or not it's looking at transactions and ledgers and being able to reliably tell a customer service or bank representative what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. Seeing that adoption curve over the last year or two, it feels like a year back we were really struggling with parsing, and now it's working really, really well, and that's unlocking so many things. So that's exciting. Well, Billy, this has been a great conversation. If people want to learn more about you or Unlimited, how can they find out about Unlimited? How can they reach out to you?
So Unlimited can be found at unlimited.finance. We have one of those domains, just HTTPS, unlimited.finance, that simple. On LinkedIn, you can find me as William Littlefield, COO and CTO of Unlimited, and I am William J. Littlefield in the academic community.
Awesome. Well, Billy, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. It's such a pleasure talking, and thanks again for the time.
Thank you for listening to the Open Story podcast. Each week we share interviews with technology leaders, founders, and visionaries to discuss their stories and what they're most excited about. If you're interested in being interviewed, please reach out to us on our website, openstorypodcast.com. For the latest episodes, you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app or visit the website, once again, at openstorypodcast.com.